Nicola has started work on Private Frank Mead's genealogy.
We're looking at the 1901 census. I can see here his father and mother, Thomas and Elizabeth, and here's Frank himself, 6 years old at the time. And we can see here that he's actually got a younger brother, Reginald, who is only 9 months old. So that's fantastic news. He's got a brother, meaning potentially there's descendants.
Reginald did go on to have a family, and Nicola has tracked down his grandson, Paul Mead, great-nephew of Frank, living over 5,000 miles away.
This album is well over 100 years old.
Paul emigrated from Britain to the States when he was a teenager, along with his sister Julia.
This is Frank Mead. I think he looks maybe pensive but hopeful in this picture, and proud to be wearing the uniform. And then his younger brother, Reginald Mead, your great-grandfather, my grandfather.
I can see the resemblance.
It's like each photo has its own story attached.
Yeah.
Paul and Julia grew up knowing very little about their father's side of the family.
My father passed away when I was very young. I was just a year and a half old when the Ministry of Defense contacted us and told us they had discovered remains which could be my great-uncle Frank. At first I didn't know what to believe about it.
So Paul contacted his family back in England to find out more about his great-uncle.
My cousin Christopher sent me these letters, photographs, and outstanding caricatures by Frank. Just have these few glimpses into his life before the war. They're incredible. They just give wonderful insights into Frank's sense of humor, his interests as a young man.
Frank joined the war early in 1914 and served on the Western Front for 3 years as a stretcher bearer. He wrote regularly to his younger brother Reg.
In his letters, there's an intimacy I think that you have between brothers. Old Fritz has a new kind of gas now, which he sends over in a shell. It makes you sneeze and also makes your eyes water. We've all learned about the horrors of gas, but Frank was making light of it. It's like he didn't want Reg to really worry, his little brother.
But by the time Frank wrote on October the 5th, 1917, the reality of 3 years of trench warfare had hit home.
The tone of the letter is a bit more stark. Dear Reg, I'm writing this letter in a small funk hole, which I share with 3 of the fellows, as it is a bit of a squash. You must excuse the scrawl. I guess you have had the wind up a trifle lately, Reg, during the air raids. Never mind, oh boy, you're much better off in England than out here.
The final letter in the collection is from Reg, back to Frank, just 2 months later.
Unfortunately, Frank never received that. It was returned unopened, just written on the cover, killed. Just to sum up his life in one word, killed, is, doesn't say much about the essence of a man.
With Paul having provided a DNA sample alongside this treasure trove of family history, the war detectives hope to be one step closer towards identifying the fallen soldiers.
The difference between what we do and when you're just reading a history book is that we're actually getting to know these individual men. We sort of build up an actual personality of this man. The fact that these men were so young, and you can relate them to your family members, and also the military that we work with. I think they can see themselves in these men, and that just brings them closer to us.
Now, the only thing the detectives can do is wait for the DNA results.
On the 3rd of December 1917, 3 young soldiers were killed in the First World War Battle of Cambrai on the Western Front. Nearly 100 years later, a farmer digging a drain in his garden stumbled upon the bodies, and the war detectives are trying to identify them.
He would be a suitable donor for DNA to compare.
DNA kits have been sent out to the relatives of 2 possible soldiers, biscuit factory worker Private John Steele and Private Frank Mead. And now War Detective Nicola Nash has discovered a descendant for a 3rd, Private Henry Wallington.
So I've been looking into Wallington's family history and it's very complex. However, I've managed to find a half-nephew and he has said he's willing to provide us with a DNA sample.
The relative does not want to appear on camera, but amazingly, he did turn out to be a positive DNA match. So the war detectives have identified their first fallen soldier as Private Henry Wallington.
Good morning, it's Nicola Nash calling from the Ministry of Defence.
The team have informed as many relatives as they can find about their discovery. And one of them, Margot Baines, who lives in Lincolnshire, has agreed to meet me.
Hi, Margot.
Hi, Nicky.
How are you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Well, what did you know about Henry Wallington before the MOD contacted you?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. This is a long-lost relative that we didn't know about, but we do now. Nicola filled us in with some of the details. Henry was my half-uncle. So he was my father's half-brother. They had the same father, Joseph. Joseph already had a wife, and he had 4 children, Henry being one of them. But Joseph had an affair with a lady called Violet, my grandmother. They had 2 children between them, one of them being my father.
This is very interesting, isn't it?
Well, it is.
A double life?
Yes, yes.
Was your father fully aware he had a half-brother?
He was never aware that he had it. He never knew. As far as I know, he never knew.
So this was a bolt out the blue?
Yes. Yes, it was. And I felt sad, really. He's part of the family. And it's that strong feeling that, although he died, we carry his genes. And so, yes. Although he did die, he'll never die.
Having discovered a half-uncle she knew nothing about, Margot's been in touch with Henry's side of the family, and a nephew, John Henry Costin, was able to provide more information about him. Private Henry Wallington was a 19-year-old from Catford, South London, who worked for his stockbroker dad. He enlisted in 1916 and fought for almost 2 years before he was killed. Henry's body lay undiscovered in a garden in France for nearly a century. Now he can finally be buried officially with a headstone bearing his name. But the 2 soldiers found with him are still to be identified. And back at HQ, the results have come in from the DNA tests. The first is for Private John Steele. His great-niece Sandra has spent the last 40 years wanting to answer her grandmother's questions about what happened to him. And I'm on my way to Croydon to tell her the DNA results.
This is going to be so hard for Sandra, but sadly the DNA result came back negative. The remains that were found did not belong to John Steele.
War Detective Nicola is joining me to break the news.
Hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
Yes, nice to see you.
Right. Thank you. Hi, Sandra. How are you doing?
Unfortunately, this is a key part of the War Detective's job because as DNA tests are done with any potential matches, there's always a chance that the results will not be positive.
We have had the results.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Oh. No,
It's a negative.
yeah, no, that's fine.
I am so sorry.
Well, yes, it would have been lovely to put him to rest. I mean, my nan always had that picture on the mantelpiece, and now and again she'd give it a dust and a kiss, and well, I think of him nearly every day.
Oh my goodness, he just looks so young, doesn't he?
But, you know, I think Nan always felt, you know, where is he? And I always thought that if it was him, get me going, that I could imagine saying, come on, John, come home now. Oh, sorry. But, yeah, that would have been nice, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'm so sorry. I know it's
Oh, no,
so
please
difficult.
don't.
But we do know that that particular group all died on the 3rd of December, and John was one of those. They all fought together, lived together, so there's every chance that they would have been with John right up to the very end.
I've always thought that even if it wasn't John, I mean, there's thousands of them, as long as he's there with his friends, that he's still loved, he'll still be with me. He'll come home one day. He will. Yeah.